The rain hammered against my windshield that night. 10 months ago, each drop exploding like tiny bombs against the glass. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had gone white, and in the passenger seat beside me, my little girl held her chest, her eyes wide with a terror I'd only seen once before. 8 years before, to be exact, when I watched my wife die in almost the same way. That morning had started like any other. I remember every detail with painful clarity, the taste of my coffee, the sound of cartoons playing in the background, and most of all, my daughter's voice calling out, "See you later, Daddy," as she ran to catch the school bus. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders, and she turned to wave at me one last time before disappearing around the corner. Everything was normal. Everything was perfect. But somewhere between that morning goodbye and the phone call I received at work, my world began to crumble again. The school nurse's voice was professional but concerned. "Your daughter is complaining of chest pains. We think you should pick her up." Simple words that sent ice through my veins. Chest pains. The same words that had started my wife's final chapter 8 years ago. I brought her home that afternoon, telling myself it was nothing. Kids get sick. Kids get scared. But deep down, in that place where fathers keep their worst fears, I knew. I knew because I'd seen those same wide eyes before, felt that same desperate grip of small fingers clutching at a chest that hurt in ways no child should understand. The real terror began 11 hours later. I woke to her screams at 2 in the morning. Not the cry of a child with a nightmare, but the sound of someone in genuine agony. I found her doubled over in her bed, gasping for air, her face pale as moonlight. That's when I saw it, that look. The same look of panic my wife had worn, the expression of someone whose body is betraying them in the most fundamental way. The drive to the hospital became a nightmare of rain and desperation. The streets were slick with water, forcing me to crawl through intersections while my daughter's breathing grew more shallow beside me. I laid on the horn at every turn, screaming at the blurred shapes of late-night pedestrians to get out of my way. Nothing else mattered except getting her to those automatic doors, to the people in white coats who might be able to do what I couldn't: save her. By the time we reached the parking lot, she was unconscious. I carried her through those doors, her small body limp in my arms, and felt the terrible weight of déjà vu. The emergency room was surprisingly empty for a Friday night, just me, my dying daughter, and a desk clerk whose face showed all the warmth of a winter gravestone. I sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair for 40 minutes, staring at the closed door where they'd taken her, my mind jumping between the present horror and the memory of another night, another emergency room, another person I loved slipping away. When the doctor finally emerged, his face told me everything before his words could. "She's stable," he said, and for a moment, relief flooded through me. But then he continued, and that relief turned to ash in my mouth. "But she's far from healthy." The diagnosis came a few days later, delivered with the clinical coldness that doctors use when they're trying to be kind about delivering death sentences. Her heart was diseased, struggling to pump blood through her small body. Her lungs were failing, making every breath a battle. Hereditary, they said, as if that single word could explain why my family seemed cursed to drown in our own bodies. "She'll need a donor," the doctor explained, his voice matter of fact. "A heart and at least one lung. Without transplants, the consequences will be dire." So we waited. Every week, we returned to the hospital for checkups, making sure she remained stable enough to receive organs when they became available. The doctor spoke in careful, hopeful terms about waiting lists and compatibility, but I could see the truth in their eyes. They were being kind, letting us hope, because hope was easier than the reality they couldn't bring themselves to voice. It was 3 weeks later when I finally asked the question that had been eating at me from the inside. What are her chances of finding a suitable donor? The silence that followed told me everything. Her blood type was rare. Incredibly rare. The kind of rare that meant we weren't just waiting for organs, we were waiting for a miracle that might never come. That night, I went home and cried for the first time since my wife's funeral. I cried for my little girl, who deserved so much more than the failing body genetics had given her. I cried for myself, facing the prospect of burying another piece of my heart. And I cried because I felt so completely, utterly powerless. 3 weeks after that first horrible night in the hospital, my daughter was deemed healthy enough to return to school. I stayed home from work that day, unable to concentrate on anything except the fear that the phone might ring. I paced around the house like a caged animal, checking the time every few minutes, counting down the hours until she'd be safely home again. It was around 2 in the afternoon when the smell hit me. I'd been dozing on the couch when something woke me, a stench so foul and distinctive that it cut through my sleep like... Inside was a single sheet of paper, damp to the touch, with a message that changed everything. You have a daughter that needs a heart and lungs or she will die. You won't find anything. Her blood is rare. Ask about the blood. You can still save her. The clock is ticking. You can exchange a child close to her age for her life. You must have them alive. And at the bottom, a simple number, 67. As I read those words, something began clicking in my head. Not metaphorically, literally clicking, like someone tapping their fingernail against the back of my skull at irregular intervals. The sound was soft at first, almost gentle, but it carried with it a weight of promise and threat that made my skin crawl. My first instinct was to go to the police. The message was clearly some kind of sick joke or threat, and surely they could trace it back to whoever was playing this twisted game. But when I arrived at the station with the letter, the officers just shook their heads. No fingerprints except mine. No return address. No direct threat they could act on. Crazy people do this sort of thing sometimes, they told me. Just keep your doors locked and try not to let it get to you. But it did get to me. How could it not? Someone knew about my daughter's condition, knew about her rare blood type, knew details that barely anyone was aware of. And that clicking in my head, it never stopped. It became the soundtrack to my life, a constant reminder of the impossible choice laid out in that first letter. The second letter arrived a week later. Then another. And another. Each one more disturbing than the last, each one accompanied by that terrible clicking that grew louder with every word I read. Some were short poems describing how I would stand over my daughter's grave, wondering what I could have done differently. Others were graphic and horrifying, detailing exactly how she would die choking on her own fluids as her diseased heart pulled blood into her failing lungs. Each letter had a number at the bottom, 66, 65, 64, counting down to something I didn't want to understand but somehow knew with growing dread. The worst part wasn't the content of the letters, terrible as they were. It was the clicking. With every word I read, the clicks grew louder and more insistent. When I tried to ignore a letter, when I tried to throw one away unread, the clicking would spike in volume and frequency until the pain in my head became unbearable. I couldn't eat dinner with my daughter anymore without hearing clicks in the background of her voice. I couldn't watch television, couldn't listen to music, couldn't even sleep without that horrible rhythm echoing in my skull. I tried everything, painkillers, earplugs, even seeing a doctor about possible tinnitus. Nothing helped. The clicking was inside my head now, a parasite that fed on my desperation and grew stronger with each passing day. The breaking point came near the end of my daughter's school year. I arrived home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, reading one of the letters I'd been too careless to hide. I snatched it away from her, scolding her for reading mail that wasn't hers, but her reaction stopped me cold. "Dad, it's just a bunch of scribbles," she said, looking at me with confusion. "Why are you so upset?" I looked down at the letter in my hands, really looked at it for the first time without listening to the clicking translation in my head. She was right. It was nothing but smeared lines and curves, completely illegible. But somehow, impossibly, I could still understand every word. That's when I realized the truth that should have terrified me but somehow brought a strange sense of relief. I was going insane. The stress of potentially losing my daughter, combined with the guilt of being unable to save my wife, had finally broken something fundamental in my mind. The letters were gibberish. The clicking was auditory hallucinations. The whole thing was just my brain's way of processing grief and helplessness. Or so I thought until the day I decided to catch my imaginary letter carrier. I took 2 weeks off work and spent them stationed by my front door, determined to prove to myself that no one was really delivering these messages. Each day blurred into the next as I sat there, staring at the entrance to my home, waiting for something that logic told me would never come. But logic, I learned, is a luxury for people who haven't fallen down the rabbit hole of supernatural horror. The smell came first, that distinctive odor of burning fish and wet smoke that had become the herald of my torment. This time, I didn't wait. I bolted for the door before whoever it was could slip another letter through the slot. I was going to catch them. I was going to get answers. I flung the door open to reveal nothing. An empty porch. An empty street. No cars, no people, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I started laughing then, a hysterical sound that echoed off the houses around me. Of course there was no one there. I was crazy. I was completely, utterly insane, and that explained everything. That's what I was thinking when I heard the mail. There was no scream when I hit him. Just a thud that brought me back to my senses with horrifying clarity. I got out to find a broken child lying in the street, his limbs bent at impossible angles, blood pooling around his small body. But he was alive. Barely, but alive. And that's all I needed. The instructions came in another letter, found against my door when I returned home with my cargo of guilt and desperation. This time, the scribbles were almost like an ink blot test, as if whatever was sending them was mocking my fragile sanity. But the clicking translated it clearly, an address, coordinates for a destination I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. What followed was a journey through places that don't exist on any map, guided by something that wore the shape of a man but carried a lantern that burned with cold light. The road beneath my van stretched and warped until it became an infinite plain of perfect asphalt, smooth as glass and empty as the void between stars. In the distance, figures moved through the fog of children, dozens of them, working with tools that scraped against the ground in a rhythm that matched the clicking in my head. As I walked closer, following the lantern bearer deeper into this nightmare realm, I saw the truth of what I was condemning that innocent boy to. These children had been here for years, maybe decades, maybe longer. Their clothes hung in tatters, their bodies showed the wear of endless labor, and worst of all, pieces of them were missing. Not just clothes, actual parts of themselves. I saw a girl with a clean hole where her heart should have been, still swinging a pickaxe with mechanical precision. A boy with scooped out portions of his legs and abdomen, revealing white bone beneath, continued his work without pause. They were being harvested, piece by piece, to provide organs for other children in the world above. And when one tried to run, tall creatures emerged from the fog, beautiful women's heads on bodies like satin-wrapped trees, clicking in harmonious chorus as they surrounded the escapee and bent down to feed. This was the exchange I was making. My daughter's life for this boy's eternal suffering. But I didn't run. I didn't try to take him back. Whether it was cowardice, desperation, or the simple fact that I'd already lost too much to turn back now, I followed that lantern to its final destination, a cave made not of stone but of human skin, where the walls themselves moaned in agony and the air tasted of despair. The figure with the lantern finally spoke, its clicks translating into simple instructions. There, in a cooler packed with dry ice, were the organs my daughter needed: 1 heart and 2 fresh lungs, preserved and ready for transplant. I didn't ask where they came from. I didn't want to know. The next thing I remember, I was back in my living room, the cooler on my lap, wondering if any of it had been real. But the organs were real enough. The surgery was scheduled for the following week, and I told the doctors they were a donation from a deceased family member. No one asked too many questions when a dying child had a chance at life. The operation was a success. My daughter recovered completely, her color returning, her breathing easy for the first time in months. We went back to our normal life. She returned to school, I returned to work. The clicking stopped. The letters stopped coming. For a while, I almost convinced myself that the whole experience had been an elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and grief. But karma, as they say, is a bitch. Yesterday, I came home to find my daughter gone and a new envelope waiting on my doormat. This one didn't tingle when I picked it up. The message inside was typed, not scribbled. I'm sorry I had to. You should understand. She didn't come home that evening. She hasn't come home since. As I write this, the smell is back, that burning fish and wet smoke that signals the return of my torment. The clicking has started again, whispering in my ear about how they have her now, how she's in that place of endless labor and slow harvest. But they're offering me another chance, another exchange. They promised to bring her back in perfect condition, better than before. All I have to do is make a few more trades. The van rental place is still open for another hour. I know where to find more children, playgrounds, schoolyards, quiet neighborhoods where parents still believe their kids are safe. I know how to lure them, how to transport them, how to deliver them to those creatures that click and feed in the fog between worlds. I know I should stop. I know I should go to the police, confess everything, face whatever justice awaits a man who has done what I've done. But they have my daughter. My little girl is in that place, surrounded by those working children with their missing parts and their broken dreams, and I'm the only one who can save her. Just a few more exchanges, they promise. Just a few more children sacrificed to keep my daughter whole. The clicking is getting louder now, more insistent. Time is running out, and I have work to do. The rental place closes in 40 minutes, and there's a playground 3 blocks from here where children play until dark. God forgive me, but I'm going to save my daughter, no matter how many other children I have to damn in the process. The clicking approves.